Welcome back. The hold is off the nomination of Frank Kendall to become the next Secretary of the Air Force tonight. One of the biggest budget challenges he may face if the Senate confirms him, though, is something he can't control. Lieutenant General Dave Deptula, U.S. Air Force retired, is Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. He's writing about budget accounting at the Department of Defense in Forbes. Dave, welcome. It's great to have you back on the program. You write this, which is striking to me. Take a quick look at the DoD budget request for FY22. You'd think the Air Force is the best funded of the three departments, and you'd be wrong. Why is that the case, Dave?
Well, first, Francis, thanks very much for having me back on. What I would tell you and your audience is the Air Force budget is burdened by $39 billion in non-Air Force spending over which the Secretary of the Air Force has no control. And so these funds, which account for 18% of the total Air Force Department budget and 20% of the Air Force as a service budget, they go directly to other Department of Defense agencies, passing through the Air Force untouched. So, putting these other DoD agency funds where they belong results in the Department of the Air Force being second to the Department of the Navy in total obligational authority, and it puts the Air Force as a service in fourth place after the Army, Navy, and the other DoD agencies.
The Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, obviously is on his radar screen. He said recently, quote, "We need to make sure the Air Force budget's represented in an appropriate way." What's an appropriate way, and what fixes this problem that you're laying out, Dave?
Well, fortunately, as you mentioned, our top defense leaders starting to pay attention to this major perception problem. And here's why it's important. Studies, analyses, and service comparisons routinely perpetuate the deception that the Air Force is getting much more money than it actually is by normalizing this $39 billion pass-through as if it was integral to the Air Force spending authority, and it's not. Secretary of Defense Austin recently acknowledged this situation in response to a congressional question. He said, we need to make sure the Air Force budget is represented in the appropriate way. And what that means is putting the budget categories in the appropriate accounting bin.
Dave, what fixes this? What gets those money into those bins? Is it just a matter of Congress saying we're going to move these line items to where they fit more appropriately, or is there something more to it than that?
No, quite frankly, it is a very simple solution. And that is taking this $39 billion and putting it over into the DoD agency account. And then that will appropriately represent where these monies are going without getting into the specifics of the details of exactly what they are for. But I think some of the numbers are important. The Department of the Air Force budget line, if you go in and you look at the top line today, is over $212 billion. Where in reality, if you move out the pass-through, you're looking at $156 billion is what the service, the Air Force as a service gets. And obviously that doesn't include the Space Force, which is getting $17 billion.
And you mentioned the Space Force. Does this get more complicated as the Space Force matures and more capability is expected out of the Space Force to deliver to the Joint Force?
Not really, because again, the money doesn't go to either the Air Force or the Space Force. It goes to other DoD agencies. And this is not a complex issue. It does not require an act of Congress. It simply requires the leadership of the Department of Defense to allocate it in the appropriate location, which is the DoD agency account.
You write, America's defense depends on dominance in air and space, but we can't be assured of that dominance in the future unless we change the way we invest now. Are you talking just about structural stuff, or are you talking about what we actually spend the money on also, Dave?
No, I'm talking about where we spend the money. I mean, here's the biggest threat to modernization of the Department of the Air Force is this pass-through, because it creates the false impression that the Air Force is getting funds commensurate with the Army and the Navy departments. And it's not. It has not for decades. And as a result of that, the Air Forces have atrophied, significantly aged, and fall into quantities less than required to accomplish our nation's defense strategy. If you look at the past 3 decades, some $750 billion has been buried in the Air Force budget that's actually gone to other defense agencies, not the Air Force. So we have a huge modernization challenge. Forgive me for going on, but it's important to understand that the Air Force is the only service that routinely operates weapon systems that average over 50 years of age. These are bombers, refueling tankers, and trainer aircraft. 80% of the Air Force combat forces don't have the stealth that's required to evade detection by enemy air defenses. So it's not just structural, it's actual, but it's this structural issue that's prevented actual increases that are absolutely required by the Air Force to modernize.
Dave Deptula, thank you very much for joining me. Great to have you back in the program.
Thanks, Francis.